Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed members of the Indian diaspora at the Ronald Reagan Building or Center, an international trade center in Washington, D.C. The Prime Minister hailed New Delhi-Washington ties and said the full potential of the partnership between the world's two largest democracies is yet to be realized. After a pomp-filled state visit to the United States, the Prime Minister now heads to Cairo, Egypt. The two-day state visit at the invitation of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is the first bilateral visit by an Indian Prime Minister since 1997. Here's a look at key highlights from the diaspora event in the U.S. Capitol.
भारत मदर ऑफ डेमोक्रेसी है। और अमेरिका आधुनिक लोकतंत्र का चैंपियन है।
The 3.5 million plus strong Indian American community is an important ethnic group in the United States, accounting for about 1% of the total population in the country.
साथियों, इन 3 दिनों में भारत और अमेरिका के पारस्परिक रिश्तों की एक नई और गौरवशाली यात्रा प्रारंभ हुई है। ये नई यात्रा ग्लोबल स्ट्रैटेजिक इश्यूज पर हमारे कन्वर्जेंस की है। ये नई यात्रा मेक इन इंडिया, मेक फॉर द वर्ल्ड, उसको लेकर हमारे कोऑपरेशन की है।
The Indian American community includes a large number of professionals, business entrepreneurs and educationalists with increasing influence in the society.
भारत में हो रही इस प्रगति का सबसे बड़ा कारण है भारत का आत्मविश्वास। $140 करोड़ भारतवासियों का आत्मविश्वास। सैकड़ों वर्षों की गुलामी ने ये आत्मविश्वास हमसे छीन लिया था।
The Indian diaspora is acting as a catalyst to forge closer and stronger ties between India and the United States. Well, the speech by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Ronald Reagan Center in Washington, D.C. marked the end of the 4-day state visit by the Indian Prime Minister to the United States. Let's now talk about this visit. And joining us now is our correspondent, Sitan Sibol, who is at the Ronald Reagan Center in Washington, D.C., and Susan Teherani, who is in New York. Susan, the White House has stated that this visit by the Indian Prime Minister was successive. Have you managed to talk to New Yorkers or Indian Americans in the United States? What are they saying about this visit by the Prime Minister?
Before Prime Minister Modi arrived here in New York, which was the first leg of his trip, there was a unity march organized by the Indian diaspora here and in 20 cities around the United States, Washington and New York City being one. And we had an opportunity to talk to many Indian Americans at that unity march. And they were very excited that Prime Minister Modi was coming, but they were also hopeful and optimistic about this visit for forging better and closer ties between the United States and India. After all, many of them have been here for years. They consider the United States their second home, but ultimately India is their motherland. And it's for anyone who's an immigrant here in the United States and has ties back home, it's the most ideal situation possible for the two countries to have the betterment of ties. So Indian Americans during this visit by Prime Minister Modi were extremely excited, considering the fact that not only did President Biden said this is a bond of the century, this is the relationship and partnership of the century, but also Prime Minister Modi echoed those sentiments during his address to Congress. And so, despite the fact that the two countries have had differences on a number of issues, but I think this trip cemented the fact that they have more in common than differences.
Right. Susan Tehrani is our correspondent in New York. Now let's head to the Ronald Reagan Center in Washington, D.C., where the Prime Minister did make a speech in front of the Indian diaspora who had gathered there to listen to his speech. Siddhan Sibol, you've managed to speak to some of the delegates and the Indian diaspora that had converged at the Ronald Reagan Center. What are they saying about the Indian Prime Minister's visit of the United States and his speech?
Well, most of them are ecstatic. Many of them are jubilant. The fact that the Prime Minister came here and addressed them. It's almost 9:30 p.m. here, if I'm correct. Yes, it's 9:30 p.m. But people are still here and talking about what the Prime Minister has spoken. And essentially, Prime Minister summed up the visit as to the key outcomes, whether it is the Americans returning the antiquities, Indian antiquities to India very soon, or whether it is opening of consulates, space collaboration, defense collaboration. One of the key outcomes was the defense collaboration between the two countries, with announcements being made by GE for jet manufacturing in India. They focus on the drones as well. But essentially, if we look at how this visit is being seen by these people who are still sitting behind me, is that they see it as a milestone visit that will help give direction to the relationship. And as the Prime Minister talked about, the fact is that both countries see each other as an important partner at a time of changes in the world, including rise of a very aggressive China. This visit has an important component of the Indian diaspora. 4 million members of the Indian diaspora are present in the United States, and they play an important role in terms of community and also policy making as well. Kamala Harris, highest ranking Indian American, is someone who is looked up to by many across the world, whether it's here in the US, whether it's in India. And we know that the Indian Prime Minister also talked about it several times, whether it's the US Capitol building, whether it is the White House lawns, or whether it is here at the Ronald Reagan Center, where he paid homage and tribute to these people who came in 50s and 60s and now, of course, have gradually played an important role in the development of the American society. They're just almost 1% of the American society, but do have an important and larger role in America's power structure or evolution of a society as well. Largely, if I talk about one thing which stood for me during the entire bit, was that moment in the White House, the South Lawn of White House, where the entire diaspora was present and they were chanting patriotic slogans and named the Indian Prime Minister. It's also the first time that the Indian Americans were gathered in such a large number at the White House, and the entire area, the White House, was reverberating with their chants. So that was perhaps the perfect picture that sums up the relationship. Whose substratum are these people who form the living bridge between the two countries?
Well, one of the statements that the Indian Prime Minister did make at the Ronald Reagan Center in Washington, D.C. is that the partnership is a new journey of convergence on global strategic issues of our cooperation for Make in India, Make for the World. He also said that the manner in which India has seen a digital revolution in the past few years is unprecedented. Susan Tehrani, who is in New York, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, did say that India-US partnership is more dynamic than it has ever been, and he says that they should keep it up and aim higher. What do you make of the president's statement?
Yeah, he said something in the lines of the sky is the limit during that press conference with Prime Minister Modi. Dynamic, really, it had a lot of aspects and a lot of takeaways, this trip by Prime Minister Modi, whether it was from healthcare to discussions on climate change, to trade, the defense partnership that was really the star of the show, for a lack of a better phrase. And then you had the technological conversations that happened, notably regarding AI and quantum computing and whatnot. So there wasn't really an area that these two leaders didn't touch upon. And then the most important being that people-to-people conversation. So I think it was dynamic in that sense.
Also, at the U.S. Strategic Partnership Forum at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., where the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was flanked by the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Chairman Emeritus Cisco, John Chambers. Blinken did say that we see the mutual benefits of this relationship when Air India purchases 200 Boeing aircraft supporting over 1 million American jobs. Going forward, Sidhan Sibol, this relationship and partnership that America and India has managed to forge so far, what are critics probably saying about this newfound bond between America or the United States and India?
Well, essentially, I would like to say that this newfound bond is perhaps things which were working for last decades. Remember, India and America weren't best of friends. We saw how in last century, whether it's India to conduct nuclear tests or whether India, of course, been involved in the liberation war of Bangladesh in 1971, America was not standing with India. It was standing with a military dictatorship next to India, that's Pakistan. That has completely changed in this visit, but over 2 decades, we have seen bipartisan support. We saw the Bush administration where the nuclear deal happened. We saw the Biden administration, the Trump administration, the Obama administration as well. Barack Obama might be saying different things today. He's not in the power. But when he was the president, he saw India as an important ally and a partner. But essentially a bipartisan support for India on the ground here in Washington, and just not in the executive, but also when it comes to the U.S. Congress as well. In the U.S. Congress, a lot of support by the congressmen, by the senators. And in this visit, we saw a joint statement. Now, that vision statement essentially lays out the ground for the future for India and for United States. The fact that the joint statement mentioned Pakistan, another country by name, and said that that country should take action against terrorism is a very, very significant diplomatic move by India and United States. Both countries are working on the issue of counterterrorism on a major way. Both countries have been putting up names, Pakistani terrorists, to be listed at the United Nations Security Council. Something, of course, Pakistan's all-weather friend China has absorbed. But largely, these are symbolic moves and also practical moves by both countries to show how they are working on issues which are wide-ranging, whether it is defense, whether it's trade. Now, of course, space. Space is something that looks like the future for India and United States. As the Prime Minister said, that sky is not the limit, and essentially he meant that space is the new frontier for India and the United States. In fact, Indian astronauts can soon go to the International Space Center. That is something that is being planned. So, all in all, a productive, hectic visit, a visit that will be remembered in history as a milestone visit.
All right, joining us now is our other correspondent, Molly Gambier, who is in Washington, D.C. Molly Gambier did attend the meeting of the U.S. Strategic Partnership Forum at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., where the Prime Minister of India did say that this is the moment India and U.S. government have done their bit and will continue to create a better and business-friendly environment for the world, not just for India and Americans. Molly Gambier, probably you can tell us more about the statements made by the Prime Minister at the Strategic Partnership Forum at the Kennedy Center.
Right. The U.S. President Joe Biden earlier, remember, had outlined how the India-U.S. relationship will go a long way in defining what the 21st century looks like. And that was in line with the sentiment that we witnessed at the address by the Indian Prime Minister to the business delegates at that engagement as well. And not just that particular engagement, but the common thread running through the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's maiden state visit here to the United States has been that of a deeper cooperation across sectors. So if we start off with how defense cooperation has got a major boost, which of course is propelling the strategic partnership, the strategic relationship between India and the United States, with far-reaching implications given how the two sides view China as a common adversary, and how the two sides also look at each other as reliable partners. So that, in a sense, was also the message given out by the Indian Prime Minister to the business delegates. The Make in India campaign that the Indian Prime Minister has been passionately pushing forward is one of the reasons why we see such intense engagement coming in, and why we also see a lot of interest in these business-to-business ties becoming a crucial aspect of this state visit of the Indian Prime Minister, which has culminated with that address to members of the Indian diaspora, which, of course, has been, as the Prime Minister put it, the sweet end or the dessert, if you may, after the main course, which was his way of signifying, that was his way of saying that the Indian American community and the members of the Indian diaspora really form an integral part of the living bridge between the two sides. Because let's face it, people-to-people ties have been the underlying theme of the Prime Minister's visit as well. And it's interesting how even ISET, the initiative on integrated and critical technologies and the lifting of barriers as far as sharing of technology is concerned, even that has been touted as a way to boost people-to-people ties, essentially deepening trust between companies on both sides, and so that it can benefit both India and the United States, both strategically and economically, because that has been the backbone also of this relationship between the two sides, which has not been smooth sailing, let's face it, but has significantly got an upgrade over the past decade, with economic ties also getting a major boost, with trade doubling in the past decade as well.
All right, that is live at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Our correspondent, Molly Gambier. I've also been talking to our other correspondent, Susan Teherani in New York, and Sitan Sibol at the Ronald Reagan Center in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Molly, for talking to us today, and thank you guys for talking to us. Like I mentioned, it is the final leg of the visit by the Indian Prime Minister to the United States. He's now headed to Egypt to meet President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi.